Just so you're aware, I am currently recording this while sick, so if I sound a little bit different than in other videos, that is why. I hate being sick. It's very not fun. I don't usually make follow-up videos so soon after an initial one, but I felt inspired to add on to my last FNaF theory. To briefly catch you up in case you missed it, I theorized that M1, otherwise known as F10N4 Fiona, was Glitchtrap/Helpy, and that the entity created by Mexis was there to prevent her from escaping the Pizzaplex or freeing the Mimic. Well, I did actually get some criticism and feedback from that video, which I took into consideration. However, I'm simply not sure I buy into the theory that Mexis itself is M1. So today, I'm going to try and prove that M1 is Glitchtrap, and even go back to the origins of that very suit. So to recap the evidence I brought up in my last video regarding M1 being Glitchtrap, I pointed out the narrative similarities involving M1, Glitchtrap, and Helpy, as well as how all of these characters seem to have the same motive, that being protecting the Mimic. This is actually the exact reason I don't believe Mexis is in fact the Mimic, because they go out of their way to try and prevent you from doing that, even installing jamming devices that prevent Cassie from taking the Vanny mask off and ensuring that she gets attacked. In fact though, the only real evidence I see supporting Mexis and M1 being one in the same actually comes from Help Wanted 2's update teaser. Because why is Mexis involved here otherwise? I think it's possible we get some Secret of the Mimic DLC in the future explaining what this scene is actually about, but for the moment, it's the biggest piece of evidence in my eyes that they are one and the same. However, Glitchtrap has a lot more. Let's actually start with one of the biggest arguments against M1 being Glitchtrap, that being that Glitchtrap has always been an out-loud villain, not the guide who just wants us to help M2 like M1 is. However, I think it's worth noting that M1 definitely isn't being entirely honest with us in Secret of the Mimic. There's a scene in Moon.exe where you have to fix 3 masks for an old lady named Sun. During this game as well, you're accompanied by Baby Owl, a friendly character who you can interact with on most screens, and who many people believe to be the stand-in for the character David, Fiona and Edwin's son. However, after you repair these masks, Sun presumably kills Baby Owl and makes a mask out of its face, which she then gives to you. And Sun, as we find out later, is supposed to be representative of M1. You can even check her oven and find out she's making something that smells like chicken. Throughout this game's history, this is the scene few people have had a solid answer for. However, if we see this as M1 killing David, then they suddenly sound a lot closer to our murder buddy. But there's even more to it than that. Since Security Breach has come out and we've seen instances of brainwashing and that infamous Staffbot silo, something became clear. Whoever Glitchtrap was, they were building something. They were building a family. And who is it that pressures Edwin into making M2 to replace his son?
For the last time, no, it wouldn't be him. No, who am I kidding? You're not really you. I've been so stupid.
Edwin, calm down and give it some thought. Try again. Make another, and we can all be together.
M1. Even back then, M1 seemed to have some plan in mind where she'd kill and replace her loved ones with robots like herself. I think Edwin caught wind of this plan as well, which is why he'd then store her code in Mexis. He clearly didn't want her gone completely, but he couldn't keep her around in robo form. This gives M1 a new goal. Since she's no longer around physically, she needs to make sure M2 is safe from harm, especially after Edwin beats it in a rage. So we have the motivation, we have the means. What we don't have is the reasoning behind this thing. What exactly was M1's goal running around dressed like this specific character? Does it have anything to do with Afton? Of course it does. It has everything to do with Afton. Something I picked up on from this game and even from Ruin is just how similar the Glitchtrap costume is to the costume suits worn by the Mimic. Typical FNaF animatronics are very sectional and oftentimes plastic, metal, or fiberglass in contrast to more typical cloth or felt costumes. Not Glitchtrap though, and not any of the many suits you'll find slumped over in Secret of the Mimic. Glitchtrap looks like an MCM suit. But if that's the case, why? Well, it of course goes back to William Afton and Henry Emily. We know that Edwin had a working relationship with these two men, although William was definitely far more antagonistic. Henry, if anything, was simply a bad friend to Edwin, while William stampeded his life. He even bought the land that Edwin's house was resting on, granting him some sort of twisted ownership over Edwin's entire life. So it's very likely that early on in this relationship, before William and Henry had decided to even use animatronics, Edwin made them suits. This is the original Spring Bonnie costume worn by William Afton, from a time before Springlock suits ever even existed. But how does this tie into M1? Why would she look like this costume if she really is Glitchtrap? Well, I may have an answer, or several even. We know from different logs that Fiona was an incredibly talented artist, even creating Chica for the restaurant Chica's Party World. She designed the character and her funny food friends, and Edwin did his part, creating a costume for a performer to wear. However, logs in the game indicate that there is a disparity between Fiona's art and Edwin's suits, specifically with Chica. Where Fiona's designs made her look friendly and pleasant, Edwin's actual suit was horrifying and scary to kids. In fact, and this is just me throwing my thoughts out there, maybe that's why Chica's Party World seems to have failed. When you play Secret of the Mimic, Chica appears alongside with her food friends. One of them anyway, Mr. Cupcake. The implication, I believe, is that despite her having all these food friends and concept art, Edwin only got around to making Mr. Cupcake before Chica's was shut down, likely due to the scariness of the Chica suit. This would then also lead to Fazbear Entertainment taking an interest in MCM, and William buys out Chica's Party World. But do you see where I'm going with this? We know how Chica was created, but what if Spring Bonnie was made the same way, with Edwin creating the physical suit for William, and Fiona being the designer of the character? She's the one who created the character for these businessmen to use. If I'm right, M1 being Glitchtrap makes total sense. It's a suit that started with Fiona, maybe the very first suit she'd have a hand in creating for Fazbear. And if you think that's not enough, look at how Glitchtrap behaves in Help Wanted, dancing around as if he actually is performing. This may imply M1 saw William perform in this suit, another indication that this thing was real. But hang on, I said Fiona creates the designs, and Edwin creates the suits. Would it not make more sense for M1 to mimic the original cartoon design rather than the suit Edwin made? I mean, sure, but Edwin doesn't have any reason to be Glitchtrap. He's not a mimic as far as we're aware, and if the books are still correct about his ultimate fate, he wouldn't be dead and able to be a mimic in the first place. So why would Fiona wear this suit in specific? Well, it goes back to Fall Fest and the day she died. We don't get a lot of details about Fall Fest in these games. We just know that it happened, and in 1 year there was a fire that resulted in Fiona's death. But piecing together what we do know, I think I can make a solid case. For starters, in modern day games like Help Wanted 2, we see Fall Fest with some major Fazbear branding, indicating that it's likely a festival hosted by Fazbear Entertainment yearly. And if that's the case, then Fiona went to that festival to work with Fazbear, to work with Henry and William. And suddenly a fire breaks out and kills Fiona? A bit strange, almost like it happened purely to cause Edwin pain. I wonder who we know who would be petty enough to kill a person just to get under their loved one's skin? No names come to mind just yet. Side tangent, there's 2 minigames in Help Wanted 2 we can say were 100% set within Fall Fest, Fazer Blast and the Carousel. And while some of the Carney's dialogue in Fazer Blast has been theorized to be about who we play as in that game, Cassie's dad, I think it could also be double entendre. You see, Carney is reciting what he actually said at Fall Fest the year of the fire, or whatever Carnival Barker was saying. Carney never uses gendered terms or expressions when talking to the player. However, 2 lines stick out. The famous Carney line where he mentions that we look like we have kids, something that matches Fiona and Cassie's dad. Another line he says mentions how we're all alone, reminding me of how Fiona was alone when she went to Fall Fest. And how does Fazer Blast end? In a fire. But we actually do play around after the fire happens. A boss battle against a cardboard cutout of Springtrap, William Afton. Afton started the Fall Fest fire with the express intent to kill Fiona, and when he did, he was likely wearing this exact suit. Now, there is one major flaw with this theory. If Glitchtrap really is M1 taking the form of Afton, their presumed killer, then M1 kind of has to be a ghost to some degree, because how else could M1 even remember this event happening? In fact, that strange note M1 wrote about having memory lapses, maybe that's what this is really about. Edwin tried to change her memory, make her forget how she actually died. But likely M1 still knew because she was possessed. But I hear you, you're reluctant to accept that there's ghostly shenanigans happening in Murray's costume manor. Everything gets explained with simple code. Or does it? Recently, Secret was decompiled, and a new mechanic was discovered. A tension mechanic. Basically, the higher this was, the more often freaky stuff might happen in the game, such as boxes jumping to life, or cutout stands activating on their own. You might just think these are bugs, but this is an actual mechanic Steel Wool built into the game, and I kind of love it. But what this absolutely confirms is that there's ghostly activity in-game, if White Tiger wasn't obvious enough anyway. Regardless, if M1 chose to represent itself as the person who killed her, that makes total sense why they would be seen as Glitchtrap. The one thing I wonder now is, why would William have such a strong grudge against Edwin in the first place, to the point that he'd ruin his life and steal his inventions? But does that really need to be answered? He basically does the same thing to Henry, and it's purely out of jealousy. William Afton as a man is someone who needs to be seen as smarter and stronger than everyone else. He ruins lives because he can, and in order to keep his own ego high. We know he killed Charlotte likely just to get to Henry, so him killing Fiona just to get to Edwin also seems incredibly possible. And when you see just how much of MCM would be stolen and reused by Fazbear Entertainment, it all makes so much more sense why Fiona would come back so malicious and look like this. She's angry and took on the look of her murderer to exact vengeance and bring her own family into this world with her. And one last thing. The Staffbot silo. I had many comments or replies telling me I was crazy or stupid for thinking this was any family but the Aftons. But I'm saying this, I think y'all jumped the gun on this. I haven't heard an explanation for why Mom is at the head of the table if not for her being Glitchtrap, or proof that Scott actually remembers anything from FNAF 4 that isn't a nightmare animatronic. Anyway, I said that this family was Fiona, Edwin, David, Gregory, and Vanessa. I was criticized for this heavily, with people telling me that this Staffbot had to be Circus Baby, aka Elizabeth Afton. But looking at this Staffbot, his appearance much more closely resembles Edwin than any depiction of William. And aside from the Nannybot, who also matches Fiona's design somewhat, the only other female Staffbot in Security Breach is this one. So it could very likely be Vanessa, especially if Vanessa actually is an Afton like she is in the movie. That leaves Gregory and David, who honestly might be interchangeable for our last two Staffbots, but I'll lean on the headless one being David since M2 has metaphorically lost his mind. And the pictures themselves with references to birthdays and the like definitely connect back to David incredibly strongly. I think this silo comes from Vanny moving M2's various drawings somewhere safe, where she then put together this representation of Glitchtrap's ultimate goal. It's a mom urging her son's new sister to take care of him. Heck, that could be another entirely separate reason why Glitchtrap chose its form, to manipulate the playtester Vanessa by resembling her late father. It's worth noting that Tape Girl never actually describes Glitchtrap's visual appearance in the tapes, just calling it a character, meaning it could have looked entirely different to her than it did for Vanessa or Jeremy. We even have some evidence of this being the case with Glitchtrap appearing as Helpy for Cassie, and if Help Wanted 2 is before Ruin, then the implication that this was the appearance it took for Cassie's father for the majority of the game's length, only appearing as Glitchtrap in full for Vanny. Here's the thing. I've come up with many different interpretations, so I'll do my best to simplify my thoughts in a few sentences. Fiona designed Spring Bonnie, which Edwin then created as a suit for William Afton to use. William decided to toy with Edwin's life, owning his land and slowly taking more and more from him. Eventually, he decided to steal something Edwin couldn't replace: Fiona. With Fiona being alone at Fall Fest, William set a fire, killing her and making sure the last thing she saw was him in his costume. Edwin would then create M1, which worked because he had created her in the basement of MCM, where Fiona's spirit resided. Fiona's personality took full control of M1, but her spirit was vengeful and angry. She decided she needed more. She needed her family to be like her. So she started with David. She let David run in the road. There was a car that was going to hit him. Edwin, devastated, is easily manipulated by M1, who urges him to create M2. And so he did, but in doing so he learned what cruel things M1 did, what it intended to do. So he locked her away in Mexis, kept under lock and key by a rabbit-shaped entity. Cue the rest of the series happening, until Fazbear Entertainment uses some circuit boards from Mexis to use some unique code found on it for Silver Parasol games. This was M1's escape. Using a variety of forms, it finally found success manipulating a subject in the form of Vanessa Afton. She took William's shape, or the closest one she knew anyway, and took over her mind. Realizing her success with this specific form, M1 stuck as Glitchtrap to continue manipulating Vanny, all the while trying to recreate her family. Now, I have an idea for Burntrap, and it's one you may or may not like. So, you know how people believe Burntrap and the Mimic are one and the same? I agree, and I don't. I think it's possible for them to actually be separate entities, with M1 coming back through Burntrap and M2 being stuck behind the wall. Notice how Burntrap emerges from a pod in the back that utilizes one of the modern day charging pods. This had to be put there. And who put it here? Vanny, of course. A lot of Burntrap's endoskeletons seemed random or out of place, but something you might notice are how it still has a number of Glamrock endo parts. I think Vanny made a new body for Glitchtrap to inhabit so it could more efficiently guard the Mimic. That's why it has the EMP-like ability the Mimic is noted to have in the epilogues, why it has control over Freddy and the Glamrocks. They're all still under M1's control, and it was down here to make sure Gregory didn't go down the hall in Find M2. And that's probably the most out there I'm willing to get today. I hope you enjoyed this theory. Maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't. Maybe you think I'm crazy. But on the off chance you don't, thank you for watching. I'm Demuted. Be sure to subscribe, and peace.